Our next session, a panel led by Rachel Stern, a geographer and researcher who focuses on extreme heat, housing justice and aging. She's a PhD candidate in geography at UBC. Her research focuses on seniors' experiences of extreme heat in rental and cooperative housing in Vancouver, specifically using interviews, focus groups, and written methodologies to better understand the politics of indoor heat. More broadly, Rachel is interested in the role of memory politics, storytelling, and oral histories, and arts-based methodologies in understanding experiences of extreme heat and climate change. Rachel.
Hey everyone, really nice to be here. Thank you so much. It's always humbling to hear your bio read back to you and you're like, here are the things I might change for next time. So as Andrew mentioned, my name is Rachel. I'm a PhD candidate from the Department of Geography, and I'm really excited to introduce this next panel, which we're calling Community-Based Climate Justice Approaches to Urban Heat and Aging. So this is a wonderful group of my colleagues who are working at the intersections of climate justice, housing justice, aging, and urban environments. And to begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the unceded ancestral and traditional lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, Stolo, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I arrived here in 2021 as an uninvited guest, and the research that you're going to hear about today occurred on these unceded lands. So I'll just take a minute to set up the panel for us. So you're going to hear about 5 different projects today, all thinking about the problem of climate change through a housing justice and urban studies lens. So thinking a lot about climate justice, housing justice in cities, and how the challenge of extreme heat intersects with other challenges around housing and aging. Many of us are affiliated with the Center for Climate Justice at UBC, and a lot of the work presented here today is also available in either reports that are out now or will be out soon that you can find on the Center for Climate Justice website, and we're also happy to send those to you if you're interested. I'll say our work, I think collectively, and you can all also disagree with me if you don't think this is true to speak for everyone, really starts from the point that vulnerability to issues such as heat isn't inherent, right? That vulnerability is actually produced by certain factors that make certain bodies, such as older adults, and environments, such as certain neighborhoods or certain housing, more susceptible to the negative effects of climate change and other hazards. And our work has also all been rooted in community approaches. As you'll hear, community partnership is really the backbone of making this work meaningful, impactful, and reflective of the lived realities of heat. And I'll also note up front for this conference, none of us on this panel are gerontologists by training, so we're bringing approaches from human geography, public health, kinesiology, anthropology, and environmental justice to this panel. And also that some of our work hasn't actually exclusively focused on seniors. Rather, we're looking at seniors and aging as a piece tied up with climate change and housing. So while many of our participants are seniors, they're coming to our projects first as tenants, friends, neighbors, knowledge holders, activists, and storytellers in their own right. And our work has really looked at them as such. So each of us is going to speak for about 6 to 8 minutes. Catherine and I are speaking together to give a snapshot of the work. This is a very short presentation, as I'm sure many of you know who have tried to put a lot of meaningful work into 6 to 8 minutes. So just to say, if you want to hear more about any of these projects, please come up to us afterwards, ask us questions, and also we'll have time, hopefully, for Q&A. So you're going to hear about social care and connection in BC housing buildings, heat in SRO buildings in the downtown east side, additional rent increases that could render tenants vulnerable to rent increases with proposed retrofits, seniors' experiences of indoor heat, and what all of this means for a wider approach to the right to cool. So also I'll say, in the interest of time, even though my bio was read, I won't be reading everyone's bios, but you can find all our bios in the program. And now I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter, Dr. Liv Yoon, to start us off. Thanks.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you to the organizers for having us here. My name is Liv Yoon, and I'm an assistant professor in the School of Kinesiology at UBC and also a member of the Center for Climate Justice. All of us here on the panel ultimately work on one big grand project. Catherine, I'm including you here because you were one of the OG members. But there are multiple prongs within and multiple separate but ultimately all related pieces of work. The one that I will speak about started out very much focused on indoor environmental quality and health, and with some understanding that yes, of course, social connection and care matter in how someone fares in climate hazard conditions, but this understanding was very much theoretical and also not very much at the forefront of our radar. So we've been working with these tenants in 3 subsidized housing buildings across Vancouver and Burnaby since May 2024 to learn more about what environments they live in, so with a focus on heat and indoor air quality, and of course the impact on their health. And we're just about to conclude 2 years of our time with them next month. And I'd say confidently now that the role of care and social connection has become one of the most prominent findings. And all the more so it feels that way because we didn't go in necessarily looking for this. So where and how have we witnessed this? These are the buildings that we are working in. So 2 high-rise towers in Burnaby with mixed-age tenants ranging from late 30s to late 80s, and 1 6-story building in Chinatown with everyone above 60. And most have a combined household income lower than $20,000 a year, followed by $40,000 a year. And just to reemphasize again, this is this sliver of the work. The rest of my colleagues will talk about different pieces of the bigger project. Okay. So before I launch into some quotes, something that cued us to pay attention to this last year was actually from a casual conversation that I had with a participant. She is friends with another participant in the project, and we often actually need to contact her in order to reach him because his health status is unfortunately unstable. And she offhandedly just told us that they had originally met at a Christmas dinner that BC Housing had put on more than a decade ago. And they hadn't actually had much contact afterwards until she got a call from the hospital years later saying that he had put her number as his emergency contact. So he's a veteran with no next of kin, as far as we know. And if it weren't for her, there were many times we probably wouldn't have been able to reach him for our field visits either. So combined with conversations like this and noticing just stark differences in the tenor of the neighborly connections we felt between the 2 sets of buildings, so the 2 sets of high-rise towers with mixed ages and the Chinatown building with mostly seniors, with all seniors actually, we decided to delve in deeper and conducted a short survey asking these questions. We haven't analyzed this data yet, so what I'm sharing are just a few responses so far that have stood out. So 1, neighbor relations are really, really good. They always talk to others and ask about each other's day in either the hallway or in the activities room downstairs. Everyone is old, so talking to one another is a form of care, which is necessary to live here. So this is from one of the residents in the Chinatown building. And I thought the connection they make between age and the form of care was interesting, and perhaps a tacit understanding that with old age comes isolation, and therefore a need for buddies. And of course, there is research to suggest that loneliness is higher among seniors, although that's now also changing with social isolation and social media. But at least across these 3 buildings, what we see is actually exactly the opposite. In the buildings with mostly seniors, there's much more rapport and connection among the tenants, while in the high-rise buildings with mixed-age tenants, it's rare that we see tenants even talking to one another. There is one exception of 1 floor in that high-rise building, and I'll talk more about that. And of course, there are many intersecting factors here, including just the sheer size of buildings, as well as the cultural and ethnic makeup of the tenants, the distribution of age groups, among others. But it is really notable that what we see is the opposite of what we usually see in literature, that isolation is more pervasive among seniors. So what that tells us is that it's not inevitable. And the second quote, I live on the best floor. The best thing that BC Housing did was change the fob, as we can now only access our own floors with the fob. But what really upsets me is that I can't socialize with people because of bed bugs. I can't invite people inside my home. A couple things that are notable here. One, there's a sense of closeness that's created from exclusion of others. They have this safe enclave now that people who don't live on their floor cannot access that floor. Two, at the same time, they mentioned that they're limited in how much they can connect because there's a widespread fear of what the visitor may bring with them, in this case, bed bugs. Last quote, and we saw many versions of this from the high-rise towers especially. The only thing I can say is my cat, so to the question, who or what in your everyday life makes you feel cared for? Unfortunately, I don't trust people. It's hard to make a friend because every time something happens, you have to watch your back. So there's this sense of mistrust and fear of others, which makes them hesitate to connect with their neighbors. And I don't think this sentiment is limited to this building alone. It really shows how broader social and political polarization manifest in ways like this too. So yes, social connection is interpersonal, but that interpersonal connection is inevitably informed by broader socio-political and cultural contexts. So why does all of this matter? Well, in the immediate context of our project, what we see is that the use of communal cooling rooms in these buildings seem to align with how comfortable the tenants feel with one another. So we did a separate survey about why they do or do not use the in-building cooling rooms, and the Chinatown tenants said that they use it very often, some even sleep there, and the high-rise tower tenants said that they mostly don't because of fear of pests, bed bugs, and frankly, fear of their neighbors. Like that last quote showed, the lack of social connection and perceived care could potentially jeopardize someone's safety from a climate hazard like heat if they're unwilling to seek cooling from a public space because they fear who's around them. So we see a close connection between community and infrastructure here. And what we're also seeing is that community itself can serve as infrastructure. Without good relationships and trust with your neighbors, you could have the best cooling amenity, and it's probably unlikely that people will use it. So again, we're very much in the beginning of delving into this data, and we know that it's not as simple as the more connection, the better, because some connections are only strengthened at the cost of excluding others, nor is it as simple as just putting people together in one room and forging connection. And I also want to be careful not to have this evolve into yet another reason to put the onus on individuals to foster more resilience through connection. But we're definitely onto something here, and something that scholars have obviously done a lot of work on, and we hope to build on that, and we're working at it. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rafi Arifin. I'm an assistant professor at UBC and a part of the UBC Center for Climate Justice, where I co-lead with Jerry Pratt and Liv Yoon on the research program on housing and climate. So today I'm going to be presenting findings from a report done in collaboration between the SRO Collaborative and the UBC Center for Climate Justice. This was really a 2-year effort, and the report analyzes indoor heat conditions across 14 privately owned SRO buildings, which cover about 850 units in Vancouver's downtown east side. So from this data and in conversation with SRO tenants, I'll also present some pathways forward to remedy the intersecting problems of health, housing, and heat. I only have 8 minutes, so I'm going to cut some of those pathways forward, but I'm happy to talk about them in the Q&A. So here's a brief outline of what I'll be speaking about today. But before moving forward, I want to just briefly discuss what an SRO is. So SRO stands for Single Room Occupancy Hotels. In Vancouver, they're concentrated in the downtown east side, and really they serve as the housing of last resort. Now, what many people miss about the tenants in SROs is that many are actually older adults. So in a recent comprehensive study done by the SROC in the city of Vancouver, they found that of the almost 1,000 tenants interviewed, 43% were between the ages of 55 and 84. In effect, many SRO hotels actually serve as housing of last resort, not just for the general population, but also for older adults. So for a bit more context here, we know that housing is a determinant of health. Indoor heat is one of the factors that really chips away at housing conditions and quality. I think furthermore, BCCDC and UBC research has shown that in the 2021 heat dome, a really prominent risk factor for heat-related death that overwhelmingly happened indoors was individual low income. Chronic disease, as we know, also played a major role. The chronic disease most strongly associated with death was schizophrenia. Now here you'll notice that surface temperatures in the downtown east side are also some of the most extreme. Furthermore, the SROC has done extensive surveys in SROs and has found that 86% of surveyed tenants report having one or more health challenges, including 58% with a disability and 41% with mental health issues. So taking all of this information together, it really becomes clear that there is a relationship, a strong relationship between heat, housing, and health, and that in many ways, especially in a changing climate, older SRO tenants in the downtown east side are on the front lines of climate change in this province. So our report was based on citizen and community science methods that SRO tenants undertook themselves as part of the SRO Collaborative's Extreme Heat Preparedness and Response Program. Now that program was led by the lead author of this report, Gabby Dobelli, and she ran that program in the summer of 2024. The program was funded by the City of Vancouver and the Ministry of Housing. So in this report and from these methods, we have three major findings, which I'll talk about today. The first one is that tenants experience prolonged heat exposure in their home. The second is that indoor heat conditions are hotter than outdoors and don't offer a kind of escape or reprieve from the heat. And then finally, SRO tenants have limited access to cooling resources and also trusted water sources as well. So our first finding is that tenants experience prolonged heat exposure in their homes. Temperature readings often exceeded safe temperature guidelines set by the City of Vancouver. The city warns that prolonged exposure to temperatures of 26 to 31 degrees Celsius can be dangerous and recommends seeking temperature-controlled shelter if indoor temperatures exceed 31 degrees. Now, temperatures in all 14 buildings that we worked in exceeded 26 degrees Celsius, and the maximum temperature recorded was over 42 degrees Celsius. Over the summer, there were 7 weeks, this is the summer of 2024, there were 7 weeks where the hottest areas in all of the buildings were consistently above 26 degrees. Now, our second major finding here is that indoor conditions in SROs are hotter than outdoors and don't offer an escape from the heat. So comparing the indoor temperature readings to outside temperatures, buildings were on average 3.5 to 6 degrees warmer than outside. This means that there's nowhere in buildings where tenants can get a reprieve from the heat. This is especially true at night, where a 10-degree difference between the hottest areas indoors and the outdoor temperatures were recorded. Now, many tenants told us that they find it just way too hot in their homes overnight and will actually go outside to sleep. So one tenant said the following: "Before I got an AC, I slept in the park a few nights. It got so hot inside and I suffered a heat stroke, and that's why now I'm so adamant about getting people AC." Another said, "You can't sleep if you don't have air conditioning. It's like an oven. The building just traps heat." So you can see for people who even do have shelter on the downtown east side, heat makes it so some choose to sleep outside. Finally, finding 3 here, SRO tenants have limited access to cooling resources and trusted water sources. So cooling resources like air conditioning and fans are often inaccessible and unaffordable to SRO tenants. Tenants are also worried that fans and air conditioning would cause short circuits in the building and increase risk of fire. So many of these buildings are just like some of the oldest buildings in the city and struggle to keep up with things like personal ACs and fans. One tenant told us this story about how she actually did not have power on the hottest day of the heat dome because she plugged in both her fan and her AC at the same time. She said the following: "During the heat dome in 2021, it was so hot, and there was one day that it was already like 30 degrees inside at 8 a.m. I plugged my fan in and my air conditioner at the same time, and it blew my breaker." Here comes kind of the bigger issue. So it was really getting hot and my cat was in distress, but I don't have access to my breaker box. It's behind a locked door, so I had to talk to the property manager. I asked her to reset the breaker. She refused to do so. She refused to give me power on the hottest day that we've ever had in Vancouver, ever. I had to take my cat and go to the mall to cool down. So in addition, many tenants have really limited access to trusted drinking water due to building conditions, lack of cleanliness, and also the age of buildings. So building on all of this data and in consultation with SRO tenants, we propose really two sets of opportunities and partnerships to solve some of these problems. We've broken these up between short-term solutions that can be done in the more immediate and also long-term solutions that might be more transformative. I'm happy to talk more about these in Q&A, but just to flag one of these short-term ones, there's this idea of a cooling bus that would go around the downtown east side during really hot days or throughout the summer. There was a pilot of one of these done in Vernon that I can talk more about as well. One of our longer-term recommendations is actually around a reboot of an old federal program called RAP, or the Residential Rehabilitation Assistance Program. This is a program that spent quite a bit of money from the 80s to the early 2000s to improve buildings throughout Canada. It approached our existing buildings not as a liability, but as a public asset that needed kind of state funding and improvements. So we suggest in the report a kind of reboot of this program in the form of healthy green RAPs. Okay, I'll end there just for time, but the full report can be accessed through this QR code on the screen, and I'm happy to talk especially a bit more about these short-term and long-term solutions in the Q&A. Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Jerry Pratt. I'm also a geographer at UBC and an affiliate of the Center for Climate Justice, also at UBC. So in my very brief presentation, I'm going to discuss a very specific set of legal issues around climate retrofits. And it's one that's affecting the security of all tenants in British Columbia, but we're certain that it's affecting most dramatically the housing security of older tenants. So with Liv and Rafi and Kendra, and also in collaboration with the Repeal ARIC group, a community organization, we've been studying a little discussed regulation that was introduced 5 years ago, and it allows landlords in BC to increase rents beyond the allowable annual rent increase, which this year is plugged at 2.3%. So these additional rent increases, referred to as ARICs, are for capital expenditures. Landlords who make qualifying capital expenditures can raise the rents up to 3% beyond the allowable rent increases annually for 3 years. These ARIC rent increases are never removed and continue to compound. Worse, a new or additional ARICs can be added as more capital expenditures are made. So, to make this a little more concrete, this figure demonstrates the impacts of ARICs on rents if the maximum allowable ARIC is applied to a rent of $2,000 a month over a 4-year period. At the end of those 4 years, the renter would be paying, it's estimated, an additional $3,325 a year for rent. That increase, as I said, is never removed, even after the qualifying capital expenditure has been paid for. Landlords can apply to the Residential Tenancy Branch, the RTB, for an ARIC if they can demonstrate that they have incurred expenses for one of 3 reasons, which are shown here on the left. Critical to the focus of this conference is the 3rd reason. Landlords can charge tenants for making changes to save energy, reduce pollution, or make the property safer. In other words, climate retrofits are a key justification for these additional rent increases. And so, in other words, these additional rent increases are being used really to offset or offload greening costs onto tenants. Working with the community-based organization Repeal ARC Working Group, we've conducted interviews with tenants affected by ARICs and drawn on FOI requested data to document where the FRICs are being applied, the rationales given for them, which landlords are benefiting, and the experiences of tenants. In terms of which tenants are being affected, in Vancouver, tenants across the metropolitan area are being affected, but you can see, and it's the places in black, the highest concentrations are, not surprisingly, in areas with a lot of tenants. They are the West End, Burnaby, and sections of Surrey. Of the 196 BC decision files that we've analyzed, boilers, windows, roofs, and elevators were the most commonly granted large expenses. And while end-of-life maintenance was the top justification for these expenses, energy efficiency was the second leading justification. Energy efficiency was used to bolster or to justify or bolster the justification of at least $5.5 million worth of ARIC expenses across 71 applications. We have been particularly concerned that it is corporate and financialized landlords who have been benefiting from ARICs. 74% of the 101 ARIC applications filed in the metropolitan Vancouver area from July 2021 and June 2023 were filed by corporate landlords. Of the ARICs awarded, corporate landlords owned 94% of the units, and our preliminary analysis indicates that 72% of the applications that employed a green justification were corporate landlords. So why is this an issue for tenants? That slide doesn't belong here. Oh, maybe okay, there was supposed to be a blank slide, but it's disappeared. No, it's okay, sorry. We're fine. We'll stay with this. But why is this an issue for older tenants? Certainly ARICs impact all kinds of tenants, but many of the tenants who we interviewed mentioned the particular vulnerability of long-term, older, and fixed-income tenants. So we heard from one, I quote, "There's definitely a lot of seniors living in the building. When we were having our meetings, a lot of people were voicing how many people here are on fixed income and that they've been banking on rental increases being at inflation. The 3% is a lot." Tenants trying to organize other tenants in their buildings said that long-term tenants were most likely to participate in an effort to refuse the ARIC increase because, I quote, "they're seniors on low income, they're underemployed, or whatever else. People who are long-term residents in the building are just like, what the hell? I can't afford to just keep paying this forever. This is eating into the income that I make, or this is eating into my pension." One person framed the ARICs as a long, slow, painful eviction. To quote, "The livability factor of being in the West End is super important to seniors. So with this change comes this unexpected significant rent increase that lasts forever and is compounded. People aren't stupid. We may be old, but we're not dumb, right? They're looking forward and saying, I can only sustain this on what I'm making until, I'm not a mathematician, but somebody could run the formula and tell each and every one of us when our money will run out. One person we interviewed had actually calculated the number of years until he would access MAID, with the ARICs bringing the date closer. So ARICs, in other words, are a very regressive way of retrofitting an aging housing stock for climate change. They increase vulnerability in an already precarious housing context where tenants are paying some of the highest rents relative to income and facing the highest eviction rates in the country. It's simply unconscionable that older tenants are paying for the greening of an aging housing stock while corporate and financialized landlords profit. Thanks.
As you all know, my name is Rachel Stern. This is Catherine White. We're going to talk about a project that we did together as part of the Public Scholars Initiative. And I'm going to begin our story with a heat warning that was declared in Metro Vancouver in early August 2025. And as this heat warning was declared, temperatures weren't experienced the same across the city of Vancouver. So the outdoor temperature station out at YVR recorded a high of 27 degrees Celsius, which was the basis on which the heat warning was declared. But in a multi-unit building in the West End, Jennifer, a 60-year-old renter, was really struggling. As her indoor temperatures soared to a high of 33 degrees, she wrote in her journal, "I feel like my brains have been taken away. Sluggish, muscle and joint pain in my legs and arms. I have brain fog. I went looking for groceries just to do something. I hung out in the freezer aisle in Safeway." Health risks due to heat can increase at indoor temperatures of 26 degrees Celsius, and sustained indoor temperatures over 31 degrees, like Jennifer's, can be really unsafe. At the same time, Michael, a long-term renter in his mid-60s, in a north-facing suite near a local beach, wrote in his journal, "I'm all good. A few hot days are okay. It's summer. I'm a little slow from the heat. I took a morning walk, reading on my balcony. My fan is on." His unit stayed at a manageable temperature of 25 to 26 degrees. Notably, despite their shared experiences of renting their homes and being older adults, there was an approximate 9-degree difference between these two homes. Even though they're experiencing the same heat warning in the same city, they experienced both very different temperatures and different health impacts from the heat. As we know at this point, especially in the conference, older adults are often focused on as one of the groups most susceptible to heat. And during the 2021 heat dome, over 550 of the over 600 people that died were over the age of 60. So although on paper, Jennifer and Michael might have similar susceptibility to heat based on age, their actual experiences are very different. Contributing to her heat issue, Jennifer explained to us that her building had a broken ventilation system, which the landlord refused to fix due to the potential cost, but she couldn't afford to move to a new place. She struggled with small windows that wouldn't open all the way, where she couldn't get a breeze into her unit. Conversely, Michael's north-facing balcony, proximity to the water, and multiple windows, which he was able to keep wide open all day and night, helped him to get a good breeze and keep it cool, even as the temperatures rose. He stayed comfortable, unlike Jennifer. These stories come from the Sensing Heat project, which Catherine and I developed this past summer as part of UBC's Public Scholars Initiative. And we worked with the South Vancouver Seniors Network as one of our community partners. And I'm a qualitative researcher from geography. I focus a lot on interviews and written data for understanding heat, and Catherine's a quantitative researcher in public health who focuses on the health effects of indoor heat. And we really wanted to work together. We actually met on working on one of Liv's projects to better understand inequitable experiences of heat from these two angles. So I'm going to pass it to Catherine now to explain more about the work that we did this summer.
Great, thanks, Rachel. So this past summer, we installed temperature sensors in 17 older adult homes across Vancouver. And we also asked participants to keep a weather journal and share their stories with us through interviews. So we were able to document the temperatures that older adults were experiencing in their homes and provide an opportunity for participants to reflect on their routines and daily experiences of indoor heat. So we tracked temperatures across July, August, and September 2025. And on the screen here, you can see the average daily maximum indoor temperature in the red line and the corresponding outdoor temperature. So you can see that over this time, the average indoor temperatures were consistently higher than outdoor temperatures. Additionally, across the summer months, we found there were these significant differences in indoor temperatures within our participants. So on the graph here, the light red shading shows the range of indoor temperatures across our older adult participants. So showing nearly a 10-degree difference between the coolest and the hottest homes on many days. So in the journals and interviews, older adults also reflected on things that contributed to their difficult experience of heat, including things largely outside their control, like humidity, wildfire smoke, and lack of wind and rain, or changes to their daily life due to the high temperatures, such as choosing to modify how they cooked, or challenges due to other aspects of the routine, like relying on hot transit to get around. Participants also shared things that allowed them to more easily deal with the heat, such as having windows that could open to get a cross breeze, feeling safe leaving their windows open at night, receiving less direct sunlight into their homes, either because of the direction they faced or from shade from outside trees, and being closer to the water, or being able to run an air conditioner. So the temperature sensors were also more than just a way for us to measure how hot it was in homes. For example, Amy, one of our participants, a senior living in subsidized housing, described using the sensor to inform her decision-making about when to use her portable air conditioner. As she explained, I switched on my portable air conditioner and watched the room temperature drop from 28 to 26 degrees. Then I stopped the air conditioner and used my fan. Our work shows that having access to real-time temperature data and the information in journals can be empowering, allowing people to make data-informed choices about staying safe in the heat. Amy additionally discussed sharing this information with her walking group, saying, "Knowledge is power. Once you know more, you'll not feel so afraid, and you'll know what improvements to make and how you can manage yourself." Rather than taking a one-size-fits-all approach to indoor thermal safety, a few ways that we can center older adults' lived knowledge are providing low-cost temperature sensors for people to monitor their individual exposure, addressing underlying concerns around undone home repairs, bad housing conditions, and energy costs, and supporting older adults to tailor general health guidance to their specific needs based on their bodies, homes, and communities. These approaches pave the way for a more equitable view of heat resilience, focusing on the actual experiences of those who are most susceptible to heat. So over the next few months, we plan to create a toolkit for groups interested in using indoor temperature sensors and journals to track their experiences of indoor heat. We're planning a community workshop and a paper to share the findings from our work. So thank you for listening. We'd also like to thank the UBC Public Scholars Initiative for their support of this project and the organizers for the conference today. You can also use the QR code here to reach out to Rachel and myself and to find out more information about our project. Thanks.
Hi, hello. Last one, thanks for bearing with us. My name is Kendra Jewell. I work as the Housing Project Manager at the Center for Climate Justice at UBC with all of these lovely people. I want to thank all of them for their presentations. Some really interesting data and thoughts that I have the privilege of chewing on today, but also most days. So thank you. So far, we've heard about the way heat lands on people isn't solely mediated by their physiological health, right? There are other socially mediated factors at play, right? We've heard about the role of social connection, housing stock quality, housing policy, poverty, on and on. So what started to happen in our research team, and maybe you can start to see it too, is that when we're thinking about the impact of heat on seniors in this province, we actually can't think about one risk category like age and isolation. Heat is an intersectional problem that requires intersectional solutions. And in most contexts, that's not really how heat is imagined in BC. In the aftermath of that 2021 heat dome, public health initiatives here have tended to focus on populations most physiologically vulnerable, right, such as seniors. This is warranted and deserving of praise because, as we know, older people living with comorbidities do die at disproportionately high rates during heat waves. But whenever there's a tendency to define vulnerability only along those biomedical lines, we run the risk of neglecting the diverse and overlapping factors that create risk in the first place. What we need are solutions that prioritize those with physiological vulnerabilities, while also considering social and economic factors, so that we can, A, ensure that the most vulnerable of the most vulnerable are protected, and B, so that we can avoid accidentally excluding other at-risk people. This is crucial for so many reasons, high among them that researchers at the BC CDC determined that they said a, quote, combined index of material and social deprivation, read poverty and isolation, were most predictive of death during that 2021 heat dome, not age by itself. So what do we do about that, right? How do we think about heat solutions in a comprehensive, integrated way? Well, our answer is that we need a right to cool. A robust, expansive, unifying framework that positions cooling as a fundamental right of all people. An umbrella, say, that mitigates all kinds of heat risk experienced by all kinds of people. In many ways, this isn't a new idea. Advocates, communities, researchers, and politicians have proposed in different forms rights-based approaches to cooling in BC. In 2024, the City of Vancouver even adopted a motion citing a right to cool, highlighting their interest in a rights-based approach to cooling. The problem there, though, was that that motion was focused on stratas. Since then, many other targeted solutions have been offered. Things like BC Hydro's free air conditioner program, expanded access to public cooling centers, the BC heat alert and response system, and changes to building codes requiring cooling in new buildings. Our point is that these are all necessary policies that have a vital role to play in our rapidly warming world. But outside of a robust rights-based framework, they're underpowered. When they're left by themselves, well-intentioned heat policies can actually thwart real change, right? As an example, BC Hydro's AC program now requires a doctor's note in addition to your landlord's approval, two barriers to access disproportionately shouldered by impoverished communities that have necessarily meant that thousands of people who direly need cooling aren't getting it. Another example, setting a single maximum indoor temperature assumes that all bodies respond to heat in the same way, which we know isn't true. Older adults, people with disabilities, those on certain medications, and other populations require different temperatures to remain safe. And so a universal threshold is inadequate by itself for protecting those most at risk. So what is the right to cool, really, and how does it help seniors in the context of heat in BC? The way we see it, the right to cool acknowledges that heat, both chronic and extreme, is reconfiguring our social worlds and environments in complicated ways. Rather than rooting down the technical tools of targeted policy fixes that leave gaps, it understands that we should take this moment to envision something new, something bigger, something that's not only interested in enduring climate change and reducing the number of casualties, but a broad, inclusive vision of collective care that leaves no one behind. One in which surviving climate disasters is not dictated by how much money someone has, how old they are, or where they happen to live. The right to cool can't be a series of one-time policy fixes. There's no set it and forget it button. It has to be a sustained political and social commitment with accountability measures that are long-term and apply to governments as they change. A cooling bylaw is ineffective if it's passed and then forgotten or remains unenforced. Free transit, green social housing, and targeted labor protections are critical, but they're insufficient on their own. Again, I know I'm harping on this, but the key here is to not only implement specific justice-based solutions, but to embed them in broader fights for housing justice, economic justice, labor rights, disability justice, and climate justice at minimum. That's a big ask, we know that. How exactly a right to cool is actioned is an open question, and one that needs collaboration from academics, policymakers, community members, and experts. We have a series of both short-term mitigative and long-term transformative recommendations in our Right to Cool report. Unfortunately, I don't have time to get into them here, but if you have questions, we'd be happy to field them. What I can say for certain is that heat governance requires sustained attention, continuous improvement, and active accountability. It will have to be iterative and evolving, but we can prevent needless suffering, death, and harm from extreme heat in BC, especially for seniors. It should be everyone's right to live well in a warming province. Enshrining a right to cool is, we think, a step in that direction. Thank you.
Yes, we have time for some questions.
I'm Pasadena, expressing gratitude for the privilege of being where we are. I'm not an engineer, that will quickly become apparent. Some years ago, I found myself beginning to wonder with medium-rise, high-rise buildings, options for the roofs of those buildings absorbing heat or reflecting. And I thought that hypothetically, if a decision were made with a particular building, it would be more to, over the 12-month period of a year, it would be net benefit to be absorbing heat or reflecting. That would be default mode for the roof. And then the rest of the year, the alternative roof absorbing or reflecting would be rolled into place. So it just seemed to me that hypothetically it might be interesting if that engineering question could be visited by a certain number of buildings, and that's basically just sharing a thought that began to come forward in my mind some years ago, and whether, I'm sure there are people here with much more engineering expertise than I have, but could it at least hypothetically be beneficial to have the reflecting, absorbing options in place on such buildings, and could there be an experiment vis-a-vis that?
I was going to say maybe we'll take a few questions and then we can kind of divide them up and respond. I think that works well sometimes with a larger panel. Yeah, please.
Hi, thank you everyone. Noor from City of New Westminster. One of the comments about intersectional problems require intersectional solutions. I'm reflecting on the use of public space as recognizing that seniors and general members of the community are dealing with polycrises, and that anything we're doing and planning for in the city actually needs to be multi-solving. So I'm thinking about a parquet that's adjacent to Brow the Hill, which is a neighborhood with many 3 to 4 story walk-ups of aging buildings. That parquet, as we're planning it, now needs to actually take the role of a multi-solving. So if we're thinking about a shelter in the park, that needs to be a place for cooling during extreme heat, but also covered during atmospheric river. It can't just be a shelter, it needs an information board where we're sharing information. It needs to be a place where the city is coming and engaging the community directly in that area. It needs to be an area where we're considering a washroom, an area where the type of planting is recognizing the type of air quality challenges, so the right trees. It needs to have whimsy. It can't have chain link fences anymore. So just throwing out just the planning, this engineering, when we're looking at public spaces, we need to move away from just a single solving a solution to how can each piece of infrastructure touch upon many of these polycrises they're dealing with. And above all, the space is an area for connection, because currently these spaces are unused. And we need to think about why that programming at the city level is keeping that way. So from polycrisis to multi-solving, just reflecting on that intersectional piece as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for your questions. Maybe we'll take one more, and then we can throw it to that one more in the front, and then we'll throw it to the panel.
Thank you so much. There's been so many wonderful presentations this morning, new learning, and recommendations. And I just noted in the biographies that, Kendra, you have done research in the past on the cultures of denial, and what you might be able to tell us around how we best promote these recommendations in face of denials.
Great. Maybe we can start with that, unless you want a moment to think about it, and then we can throw it to the rest of the panel to jump in on the more thinking about engineering, both new and existing buildings, because I would think with roofs, we want to be thinking about both retrofitting existing buildings, but also in new buildings, how they might be dealing with that, and then also thinking about these multi-service spaces. I wonder, Rafi, what comes up, and Liv is maybe talking about some of the building cooling rooms and how they serve different spaces and some of the barriers around that, but happy for anyone to jump in. So yeah, Kendra, please.
Does this work? No. Yes? No? Yes. Oh, closer. Okay. Thank you for that very small question about denial. I really appreciate that. Yes, so I did a lot of work on cultures of denial in coastal Florida. So both explicit, I don't believe climate change is happening, and more implicit, it's happening, but I'm going to keep living my life the same way I always have anyway. I think that latter problem is more what we see in Canada. I think there are clearly climate change denialists who might say this isn't a problem, or this isn't happening, or whatever they might say. But I think at the scale of politics, most people would agree that climate change is real and that it is happening. So the problem with denial that I see is a softer kind of denial in those spaces where we might be looking away from the problem of climate change without having a sustained commitment, attention to those problems, right? And this is what we're talking about in the context of heat policy. We can't just make one policy change that's targeted, say that max indoor temperature guideline, right? And then say, okay, that's done, I can look on to other problems now, right? We can't engage that kind of, what I would argue is a soft kind of denial. We have to continue to work with this problem, continue looking at this problem, because it's going to keep shifting and changing as demographics change, as it gets warmer, as it gets cooler, who knows, right? So that's what I would say in the context of this. We have to keep looking at it. Sustained attention is the best antidote to denial.
So for that point on polycrisis and solutions, I think that's where many of our reports come to, that these problems are deeply connected and the solutions are too. So that can go two ways. That can make our solutions kind of more complex, more nuanced, but it can also just actually retool or help us re-understand how to approach existing solutions. So a lot of what I talked about in the SROC and CCJ report, and a lot of what was mentioned here today throughout the panel, was around housing policy. And so the predominant approach to housing policy today is often through an economic lens, right? So if we are to really kind of face the crisis, this is where people experience climate change most often, we can re-envision housing policy as social policy, as climate policy, as aging policy, rather than just through a strict kind of economic lens. So I think when we go down that kind of polycrisis route, we can say that our solutions have to be more nimble, more nuanced, more complex. There's also an approach that says, we actually know what will work, and we just need to reimagine the different drivers or different inspirations for something like housing policy, dislodging it from just a purely kind of economic approach. Something more grounded and concrete to that question of polycrisis is communal cooling rooms. So we've been working with the SROC to actually evaluate a communal cooling room in an SRO on the downtown east side. It's one of the only ones that exists so far. And I think one of the graduate students who did some of that work is in the back, Ida. And what we've found from very preliminary results of that study is that, yes, these cooling rooms provide a space to cool down from the heat in these buildings that are just terribly hot. I mean, some of the hottest temperatures that you could imagine indoors in our city. But what they also provided, and what people actually told us more often, is that they provided a space to connect with others, to organize, to kind of build a sense of dignity and power to challenge some of these injustices in the buildings which they live as well. So something kind of simple like a cooling room becomes like almost like a Trojan horse, right, for tenant empowerment and organizing. So yeah, but this is a great point. Thanks for that. Do you want to, yeah.
Just add that it's really wonderful to hear someone from the City of Westminster talking about polycrisis, because the other thing we find is that these issues are so siloed. So yeah, good to hear your commentary and get your question.
I'll just add quickly, so to the infrastructure question as well, and I'll address the roof question as well. I think simply, so it also has to do with how we think of infrastructure. I think when we think infrastructure, it's bridges, buildings, but I actually looked at the etymology of this. It's underneath structure. Infra means underneath or behind, and I think we need to think about what foundations we need for these structures to be effective, and things like community that are really intangible personal connections. I think those really matter for these to be effective at all in the first place. And to the roofing comment, I think like these passive cooling options are very much on the radar of builders, and certainly organizations like BC Housing when they are looking to do new buildings. So yeah, I hope that's an encouraging sentiment that you can take away. Thanks.
In the interest of time, we're going to move on. And let's thank this wonderful panel addressing social